everybody. This is Alan with Meet the Thriller Author. And on the podcast, I'm welcoming back Nick Petrie, who is the author of the best-selling Peter Ash series. The eighth book in that series, The Price You Pay, will be coming out in February 6th, 2024, but it is available for pre-order right now. So Nick, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Alan. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, so we talked last time we chatted was about a year ago. You had the seventh book coming out, and now here's number 8. So it must be exciting. And I was kind of wondering too, when you first started writing the series, the first book was The Drifter, right?
Right.
Were you envisioning a long series, hoping? How does that work when you're pitching this?
Not at all. I did not. Well, I didn't think that book would ever get published because I'd written 3 previous books that couldn't get published, and so why would this one be any different? But I didn't think of it as the start of a series. But there must have been something in the DNA of the book. I love series. I read series. And my agent got hold of it, and she said, "So you're going to write the next one, right?" And I'm like, "Sure, yeah, I can do that." Which is the answer I try to provide at all times is sure, yeah.
Yeah, I can do that, right?
Yeah, as my wife says, just say yes. But it's interesting, right? Because so now I'm, book 8, has become the long running series, and it's a challenge to sort of find another way to approach the characters, something new to throw at them, and a way to continue to develop them, right? Because my readers in particular are interested in character. These have become surprisingly to me really beloved characters. So I had somebody online suggest I kill off Peter's girlfriend because she was too bossy, and there was a little bit of pushback. I thought that was sort of interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. Well, is it that something that people complain that too now? If you do that, then other people will be upset with you for doing it. So
Well, and it's right. The challenge of a series is that the protagonist is going to survive. And if you have these recurring characters that have been through all the previous books, you're pretty sure they're going to survive too. So how do you keep it feeling risky, keep feeling the tension, and one is to sort of try really hard to kill your characters and see what happens.
yeah, is that part when you're writing these, when you started getting the idea for a new idea for a new book, do you right away know, oh, this is going to be a Peter Ash, or do you how does that work when the idea first comes to you?
Well, I mean, the beauty of the series from a writer's standpoint is that it's very flexible, right? The books are set in a whole bunch of different locations. There's no fixed spot. I'm not like Robert Parker writing about Boston, or Robert Crace writing about L.A. Peter can go anywhere. He's been to Iceland, he's been to Memphis, he's been to California. So that there's all of this flexibility built into it, and there's only 3 recurring characters really, that are that really get a lot of page time. So I get to add all kinds of other elements, right? To help. It helps me keep the books fresh. It keeps the books unique to each other. So there are a lot of stories that can certainly be Peter Ash novels, but I do have a couple in mind. I'm actually working on one right now that's not a Peter book, because I just wanted that character to be kind of more of a mess. Peter is a heroic character, and it's fun to write. But I wanted to write somebody who, didn't have such a strong sense of right and wrong. I wanted to write somebody who was kind of a screw up. And so that's the thing I'm working on at this very moment. So to get back to The Price You Pay, which is the new book, the thing that I've done differently with this is Lewis, who is Peter's best friend, in Peter's mind, the most dangerous man he's ever met. Lewis is the one who comes to Peter's rescue when things get really hairy. And in The Price You Pay, I wanted Lewis to be the one who was in trouble. And so Peter comes to the rescue. So in this book, Lewis's past comes back to haunt him. Lewis is a career criminal who's mostly retired. But his past comes back to haunt him, and I wanted Peter to be, sort of to ride along with, to see Lewis's former life. And so that's sort of what I've done with this book.
Yeah, so it was fun. It was when I was reading, it was like the last one was like a little small town Nebraska. Now here we're in like in Chicago, and the crime, the underworld area of Chicago. So that it makes them real fun, like you said. Like so, like the location becomes kind of a big part of the of each new book.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm super interested in setting, and
yeah,
I think setting, if you lean into it, it really becomes a character of its own. You know, the book that I wrote, Burning Bright, the second book, which is set in California and Oregon and Seattle, has a very different flavor to, you know, the first book set in Milwaukee, or the third book set in Colorado, just because that right, there's also topics that I'm interested in, right? So every book had sort of diving into something, whether it's emerging technology or the new, well, that's no longer so new, but the, you know, legal cannabis, that's the Colorado book, or, you know, race and class, that's the book that I said in Memphis. So I'm always starting with sort of being interested in some kind of thing, and I sort of picked the location as a way to highlight that issue that I'm trying to tell a story around. I mean, these are not uh, you know, this is social commentary in the way that all crime fiction is social commentary, but it's not a, I'm not trying to hit you over the head with a solution. I'm trying to tell a fast, fun story that is about something, right? That has some content to it. It's not just, you know, good guys and bad guys beating each other up, although there is that too.
and so when the what's your process then like when you first get the idea for so like for the price you pay, when you get the idea, do you like outline what's how do you start working on it, and how long does the process take for you?
I would love to be an outliner. I think that would be a much more efficient way to write a book. I have often said that the way that I write a book is the worst way for me to write a book, aside from every other way that I have tried. I am a total pantser. I start with barely an idea. This one has a little bit more of an idea than others because I knew I wanted kind of Lewis and Peter to kind of reverse roles.
Mm.
But you know, mostly I start with a circumstance. I start with a situation, and I just try to. And there's all, you know, like all writers, I have sort of stuff I'm thinking about, something I've read that's kind of stuck on my mind, or you know, a story in the news or whatever. And I just keep going, and I keep trying to interest myself. I keep trying to, you know, I have some tension on the page, and um, you know, I'm just trying to kind of entertain myself. And if I can entertain myself, I can entertain a reader, at least in theory.
Now I remember that with that last, you had a lot of jobs before you started writing. Is that something that you did you always want to write, or is that always
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, I was the editor in chief of my high school newspaper,
Oh, okay.
and that, being that, allowed me to write an 8-part soap opera my senior year, featuring all of my friends and enemies. Um, and you know, when the paper came out, people would stop me in the hallway and say, "Oh, this was really funny," or "Oh, you know, they would comment on, you know, what I'd written, and I'd already had taken a couple of creative writing classes, but that was sort of like, oh, to have people actually read this weird stuff coming out of my head. I got hooked. So my undergraduate degree is in creative writing and American culture. So I'm one of the few people actually use their college degree for a living, which is weird. And I, you know, along the way, I got a master's in fine arts, and I mean, I really have been writing forever. I've written a bunch of short stories. I wrote 3 books I couldn't get published before the first one, as I said. So, um, you know, I think that's a key ingredient to a life in publishing, is you would do it whether you got paid or not. And I mean, that's definitely where I am, because I did it without getting paid for 25 years.
Yeah, yeah. Then you become the overnight success, right?
Yeah, yes, yes, the 25-year overnight success.
uh, how do you what like the MFA program? What was that like? Is that something that you enjoyed going through that? Because those are pretty tough.
Well, it was interesting because I was, I mean, in the early days, I did not, you know, I didn't really want to write crime fiction per se. You know, when I was in high school, I wanted to be Ernest Hemingway. When I was in college, I wanted to be Jim Harrison, and afterward, I wanted to be Cormac McCarthy. So, you know, I always had sort of big ambitions, but I'm not sure that what I wrote sort of fit that. And I grew up reading crime fiction. I grew up on sci-fi and fantasy, which is very story-driven stuff. Um, and in my first, and when I turned in my first story for that first seminar in my MFA, my professor said, "You write the kind of stuff that people are actually going to read," and it wasn't a compliment. It was the kind of place where it was like very ivory tower, and like, you know, we had somebody who'd already won a Pushcart Prize at 22. You know, people really trying to write, you know, family dramas, you know, really, you know, kind of all across the board. But, you know, I learned what I got the most out of it was the community of people to whom writing was important, right? And you can get that. I'm not sure it was worth the money I spent on an MFA, but you can get that at a writers conference, right? You can get that by going to VoucherCon. You can, but I'm not sure I got much real feedback as a writer that I really took away. I think for me, I learned to write by reading. I learned to write by, I mean, I still read a lot. I read 100 books a year. I start probably twice that number, and I'll read a couple of chapters, and I'll either, you know, I'll put it down or sometimes throw it across the room if I get really annoyed. I read a lot of nonfiction that I'll read, you know, I'll read half a book or a third of a book, but I will finish, you know, literally 100 books a year and plus periodicals and everything else. And because you want to get soaked in story, you want to know how story works, and you know, for me, that was my best teacher, was to read good stuff.
Yeah, and so what was the turning point for you then? Because I would imagine, yeah, like those MFAs probably aren't too big much fans of like genre fiction. What started making you think, oh, maybe I'll try write a crime thriller? And who were like some of the authors that inspired you and that you liked when you were reading them?
Oh, well, I mean, I grew up reading Robert Parker, those Spencer books. I still go back and reread. Um, Elmore Leonard, when I was in high school and college, his stuff is fantastic. I can't believe that there are a lot of people who still don't really know who he is, but he was a very big deal in the 80s and 90s. He had something like 10 of his books were made into movies. Super talented, tight crime writer. Um, who else did I read? Like Travis McGee, you know, the John D. MacDonald series. You know, all of that kind of stuff from the 80s and 90s were really influential to me. And I still read, you know, Robert Crace, whose first book, The Monkey's Raincoat, came out when I was in college. I have read every single book of his as it came out for his entire career. And he's, again, a super talented guy, obviously. Um, you know, I mean, I mean, I read my friends. I read some of the big names if I think it's a big book. On my newsletter, actually, I just did a Christmas edition where I gave out some recommended some books for gifts, and I try to recommend people who are either just starting out or who are not super well known. But I ended up shouting out two of Michael Connelly's books because he, I think, is still really stretching. He's still trying new things. He's pushing his characters. He's pushing himself. Um, you know, it's sort of a commonplace in the world of crime fiction that Michael Connelly is, you know, one of the best. But to really see it, to go back and be like, wow, like, and I will take a book apart. A couple times a year, I'll find a book I really like, and then I'll go back and read it again, and I'll outline it, and then you can really see the bones of how a book works. You know, it's you know, chapter by chapter, just a couple of lines, what happens, you know, what the emotional content is, what the plot content is, you know, if there are clues or whatever, I'll note that, and how many pages. And so, like, you can really learn great mechanics that way. Like, how many chapters can you go between, you know, if you have 2 points of view and you're alternating, how long can you go between those points of view without losing the second one, right? You know, what's a good ratio for going back and forth? I mean, it's basic stuff like that, which is, I think, kind of hard to learn. You just have to sort of feel your way through it. But if you can break down a book, if you can beatline a book that you really like, you can really see the bones of how it works. That's also a really good way to learn how to write novels.
Yeah, that's a great idea. It's like a reverse engineering it, basically.
Totally.
Yeah, I've done that. I've done that myself as well too. And like you said, just this little synopsis, you know, a little Word doc, and then just chapter one, chapter two.
Yeah.
The way you read it into, yeah. Yeah, it's a good advice for because I know a lot of aspiring writers listen to this podcast. So, yeah, good. And that's one thing I hear too. Sometimes you hear I've interviewed people that are like, well, I don't like to read them in my own genre because I get work. Like I don't understand that. I love crime thrillers, and I'm a fan first. I could never just give it up because I'm worried, I'm copying somebody or something.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I sort of understand that. I mean, I also am a fan first for sure. And but one of the problems, and you probably have this problem too, is that once you become a professional writer, reading changes,
Mhm.
right? That reading becomes part of the work. So, but for me, if I can find a book that I just want to stretch out on the couch and I stop analyzing it as I go, like to me, that is a rare pleasure. And so I have a short list of those authors who I can just fall into their books without having to take them apart and put them back together in my head.
Yeah. And now, so you were saying that you start writing your book, you're not knowing where it's going to go. How do you keep yourself? I mean, do you have like word count goals then? How do you keep moving forward? If do you ever
I,
get
I do have
stuck or?
I do have word count goals. I really show up every day, and I don't, I'm my goal is 1,000 words a day. I have lots of days where I'm hitting 15, 16, 1,700 words. My record is 4,000. I've only done it once, and I haven't come close. It was just sort of a rare day. Um, but there are plenty of days where it's like I have to figure something out, so I will just park my butt in my chair with a notebook and just start scribbling, or I'll open a new document and I'll just sort of start writing in all caps about, so what am I trying to do here? And it's really sort of talking to yourself.
Mhm.
I've also got a big artist pad, which is out of reach here. I'd show you, but where there's no lines. So if I need to draw a picture of a parking lot where something happens, right? If I need to diagram where the cars are and where the door to the bar is or whatever else, that helps me visualize. Or if I'm working on plot or story, it's a big piece of paper. It's a 17 by 11. So I draw arrows and connect things, because that's a big piece of what we do as writers, is to make sort of unlikely connections. So I'll have those days too where I know I'm not going to get my word count. I know I'm not going to move the book forward, but those are necessary days for me. And I kind of build those in, because there's a lot of head scratching. I think for outliners, they do all that head scratching in the beginning, at least in theory. um, Outlining for me is it's like and I've tried it. Once I'm done with an outline, I'm done with the book. I'm bored.
Mhm.
So for me, it's there's a great, I've got it up on my wall here if I can find it, a great Tennessee Williams quote. Oh, where the hell is it? I have all these quotes up on my wall. Just keep the thing going any way you can. If you have to pull out a gun in the second act, do it. That's Tennessee Williams.
Yeah. Do you work through the whole first draft first, or do you go back as you're writing it, or?
There are certain I mean, I always revise the couple days before, and I find that to be really necessary, because I'm just sort of lurching forward, and then I'm like, oh no, actually, this is how this conversation should work, or where's the emotion here? I have to find this emotional piece. So I probably spend a third of my day revising the last 2 days worth of work, and then pushing forward. But then I'll get stuck, and to me, getting stuck is a signal that I've made a wrong turn, or I've forgotten something. And so I'll kind of work my way backward to be like, yeah, to look at those choices. Did I make the wrong choice? Did I forget something? Is this character not the right character for here? Um, and then if I can't figure that out, then I go all the way back to the beginning, and I just edit my way forward again. And I find that process is really important. Once I'm, after the first act, after the second act, partway into the third act, I just like I have to, like, you leave yourself these little clues about what's going to happen that you don't know you're dropping. But it's like, oh, on page 50, I just included this rando little detail, but if I tweak it, I can use it there for that other thing. So I mean, for me, I learn what some of my subconscious intentions were, by going back to the beginning. And then by the time I'm at the end, what I really have is a couple pages of notes that I have to go back and integrate because I wanted to keep my momentum. So, oh yeah, and in this scene, you know, the car chase should end like this, not like that, right? Or this character needs to be, I need to go back and change the initial description to match the way the character evolved, you know, as the book went forward. So I have some of that stuff that I just don't want to blow momentum. But then, you know, by the time I get to the end, I have really 10 days, 2 weeks worth of edits, and then it's out the door to my editor.
Oh, wow. So you're right pretty clean then, even though you're going back and all that.
Well, it's I mean, part of it is going back is cleaning up,
Yeah.
right? So I mean, I have friends who you know, they write a really dirty, bad 40,000 word draft, and then they go over it again and they add a layer of place. You know, the first draft is just basically dialogue and action. The second draft, they layer in, you know, place and location and some of those details, and the third draft, they layer in, you know, it's a historical novel, so they lay in the history piece. You know, oh, with the car needs to be a Model T and blah blah blah, right? Like to me, that I could never function that way.
Yeah.
So I've always got a half dozen windows open on my browser. You know, gee, I'm researching fentanyl. You know, I'm researching, you know, cannabis, how to, you know, cannabis grows. I'm researching, you know, whatever. And so I kind of research along the way. And by the time I get to the end, I always spend a lot of attention on sentences and paragraphs and dialogue. To me, that's really important. The quality of the prose, of the language, has always been important to me as a writer. So that's probably it's probably the biggest time waster as a writer. Is like, oh, I just want this to be just right. I had an editor once who was like, yeah, Nick, nobody cares. Like you are the only person who notices, but I do notice, right?
Yeah.
It's important to me.
Yeah.
And I have friends who are writers, and I know they're going to read my stuff, and I want them to, right? you know, you write for your friends in a way as well.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, the so and so is going to pick that up. So you
Yeah,
prepared
yeah.
already. Yeah. And so now with your research too, like I'm kind of curious because you know, like your books, you know, with the Peter Ash books are always set in different areas. Do you usually do you write about places that you've been to, or do if you haven't been there, you just research it online, or how does that work?
Well, no, I go every place
Oh, you go?
that I'm writing about. Oh yeah, no, I find that to be really important. Sometimes there are places I've been to, but then I go back. Sometimes they are places I want to go. So I'd never been to Colorado, so that, you know, was an excuse to go drive around Denver and go visit a bunch of cannabis operations and take a backpacking trip with my son. And but you know, when you're there, you get stuff that you will never get online. I don't think there's really a substitute for it. So, you know, in Colorado, it was the fact that in Denver the streets are really wide, and you can see the Rockies if you look west from pretty much any street anywhere. They're so big, and they just dominate. And so it really gave the city a Western feel. And so that book actually ended up kind of being a Western in a way. The book about Memphis, you know, it's really, you know, to the detail I think I used that was the most evocative is when I was there are all these flowering trees. So they're beautiful, but the flowers were all falling off the trees, and they were rotting in the gutter, and it was a sort of this funky, putrid, floral smell. And that was a book about, you know, race and class, and set in Memphis. And so, you know, just the metaphor of these things that you bump into by accident. That, I mean, I would never have occurred to me that would be part of Memphis, is the smell of these flowers rotting in the street. But I'm a detail person. I'm really interested in having these books be evocative, right? I want you to feel like you have fallen into this world. And so that's the other reason why I think everybody should really go research the places that they're writing about.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that too. Yeah, you're not gonna get that from Google Maps.
No, no. I mean, and not to, I do spend a lot of time on Google Maps. I spend
Yeah,
a lot of time on Street View, and those are super useful tools for every writer. But to me, that's the place to begin. That's not the place to end.
And so now with in the price you pay, the setting in Chicago, I know you're not too far away in Milwaukee. So do you know Chicago well, or did you go over there to research for this
Oh,
one?
I definitely, I drove around some really sketchy
I was going to
neighborhoods.
ask about that too, because Chicago's in the news a lot lately.
No, Chicago is super interesting. Milwaukee has sort of a little brother, uh, feeling about Chicago. But Chicago is the big city, I love to drive around terrible neighborhoods. It drives my wife nuts when I go. But it's not like I'm driving a nice car. I'm driving my 17-year-old Honda minivan, so I'm not worried about appearing to be too affluent or any of those things. And the other thing about that is that we have these suppositions about those neighborhoods, that like everybody is, gunfire is going off at all times and you're going to get robbed on every street corner. And the fact is 99% of the people in those neighborhoods are just trying to go about their day. They're trying to get to the grocery store, they're trying to get to work, they're trying to live their lives. And to me, I think that's a really important piece of writing crime fiction, is that like it's in the middle of a real it's in the middle of the real world, right? I want these books to feel realistic, that you're dropped right into something and you're learning something. But my characters are not Superman. My characters are not invulnerable. I want people to identify with them, right? And it's a little kind of hard to identify with a Superman.
Yeah, I think that's what makes it fun too. Yeah, because like you said, they're not perfect. They have, there's problems and issues, and that makes it more fun to read than, like you said, they're perfect or Superman or whatever, like a Marvel movie.
Right. Well, again, I appreciate that you find them fun to read, because to me, I think that's important stuff.
Yeah. And so now, before I let you go and everything, and now you were saying too about you're working on a new book. So are you to be working on another Peter Ash in the future, or
Oh,
what's?
absolutely. I'm so not done with Peter. One of the interesting things about writing a standalone was I was really realizing how much I love Peter and the other characters in these books, and how much of myself I put into those books. Writing something different after 8 Peter Ash books has been really a challenge. Um, and I am not interested in being finished with Peter anytime soon.
And so, well, when does your next one? So the Price You Pay comes out in February, and so the other one was that going to come out next year too,
If I finish it on time.
And I did get a copy from your publicist, so
Oh, excellent, excellent,
I've
excellent.
been enjoying that. Yeah, so like I said, I do have a lot of aspiring writers that listen to this, and so I always like to ask my guests before I let them go. Like I know we've been talking about, you've been giving some great advice, but just some advice for somebody who wants to write thrillers and mysteries and suspense type novels.
I guess I would give advice to a larger group of people, I guess. I think writing is really hard, right? And you have to give up a lot of stuff to have the time. It takes a long time to learn to be a writer. It takes a long time to write a book. Unless you're one of the very lucky people who, you're 22 and you can write a book in 3 months, and in which case, God bless you, and I hope never to meet you, because that is not me. But it's hard to do, and I think what I want my work to feel like when you're reading it is I want it to feel effortless, right? I want it to feel like you're blowing through it. And I think that's a quality that all of our favorite writers have, is that you're just in really good company and you're having a really good time. But that's not what the process of writing is like. So if you feel like, man, this is really hard and I'm never going to get good at it, I've written, I got 8 books published, and I still feel like that on a daily basis. I'm in contact with a number of writers. I have a phone calls that I make every week or two to other writers, and it's hard for everybody. There's a great interview with Lee Child, who is kind of the granddaddy. He's no longer writing those Reacher books anymore, but there's a great interview. It was what, uh, 2 or 3 years before he passed the torch to his brother, where he said every book he sits down and he's afraid he's lost it. It's like, he's written 20 books, but yeah, I don't know, can I do it again? And like that, to me, that was so freeing to know that even Lee Child, who is such a stylist and who has been, those books are, so widely read and they're so well written that like he is struggling too. And so I guess that's for me the message is that yes, you need to write something that's interesting to you, that feels like you. Don't look for a niche in the market and fill it. Write the thing that you want to read, but also know that it's hard. And if you're struggling, like just keep going. Like that is my mantra every day, is just keep showing up at the page, keep trying to move that story forward, and you will get there. You will get there if you keep showing up.
Yeah, that's a great advice. And like you said, it took you 20 to 25 years, so
Sure. And I know, I know a whole bunch of writers who, right, I read 3 books I couldn't get published. That's kind of a normal story.
Mhm.
And people who are now household names, had that same, long challenge. It's a hard thing to do.
Yeah. All right, Nick. Well, thank you so much for coming back to the podcast and talking to us about your new book and what you've been up to. It's been very nice catching up with you again.
Likewise, it's my pleasure, Alan, and thanks for having me back.